All right, so I finally ironed out my path. I found out an interesting thing. If you ever are messing with the splines, never right click on the spline and go to reset the default, because after that you can no longer select the spline. Luckily I was able to undo it and fix my spline issue. Also went through and tried to do some cleanup work with the path, to clean up the grass, make the uh, some kind of pseudo realistic something kind of path for leading out of the door, the front door, to the actual main street. But enough of that. We're going to move on to populating the actual area with some NPCs. And for this, we're going to actually use the thing that I cannot find. If I can find it. We're going to use the spawn point under props to spawn crowd objects. And what this would do is spawn crowds of NPCs and randomly generate NPCs with different appearances and things like that based on template information. So I can just make this whole area right here crowded with a certain amount of NPCs. Based on our NPC information. So if I go over here into actors, we have our NPC character. If we just open this up, inside of our NPC character, in the default class, if we scroll down, we should get a there we go. Under modular character, we have our template information for the random characters, and we have a male and a female character data. Inside this male and female character data, if we click on one to find in the viewport in the content browser, and we open this up, we see our definitions for our template information. So we have our animation master that's going to be used for our NPC movement. We have a set walk speed for that given actor, depending on if this actor is a wide stepper or a shorter stepper, to make sure that the animation matches the character. You have a scale base, which is just the average scale of that character, and a flux. And the flux can control how much taller or shorter the character will be away from that desired base scale. On top of this, we have actor data, which could be one or many mesh actors that could operate as that main actor. Then you have the clothing that will match those actors. And what it will do is randomly pick from these different clothing articles, shoes, hair, and also randomize morph data to be able to generate a random character. If we go into our morph data, inside of our morph template, my characters don't have any actual morph information, but I just put some things in here to show what could be done. So you have the name of the morph, the value ranges for that morph, and then the morph value is actually not used here. It's used when you make an instance of it inside the class, so it can store the actual current value of the morph that it randomly generates. So you can have any number of character templates in here to be able to generate characters. Now, in the documentation, I also noted that you can use the same template information to create different types of monsters and things like that, or you can actually, it's actually being used manually inside of the PC Hero to be able to switch out different body parts based on those different slots. But if you did not want to have any kind of armor system, you could actually use that to randomly generate a character from, I guess, a selection menu or something like that that will actually set these settings for the given clothing articles that you want for the person. I did not set my timer for this. I'm going to assume that I've been talking for about 10 minutes. But you can also go in and on top of the actual character information, let me open the character again. If we go to this base character also has inside that material object, they have the ability to get a random color for the actual skin tone. And this is actually controlled by the red value of the actual mask. So anything that we want to randomly give a color to, same thing with the clothing that randomly gives color, the red in the actual mask data will give us will tell us where we can apply our random color to, and that's set up in the materials. I eventually wanted to be able to have it to where we can have any number of levels of actual control for having the R, the G, and the B to be able to have random color. But for right now, for the example, I just stay with that one red mask to be able to give a masking for one layer of clothing, or that, in this case, the skin. But the clothing and the skin randomization for the colors works pretty much the same way. So inside of the spawn sphere, we have a representation of the spawn area, and this actually grows to the proper size area so you can visually see what area that the NPCs can roam in. So I'm going to increase that somewhat to make sure that it doesn't go too far into buildings and we randomly have NPCs spawning inside of buildings. I can control how many each of these are spawning. $20 might be a little bit heavy for the AI, the number of AI that appears. I'm also going to enable the debug so that we can actually see that as we get closer to these spheres, it's actually going to detect the main player and start loading in the NPCs based on the distance. So that way, as we go away from the city, we can unload the unnecessary AI that's using up resources in the system to free up free space for you to actually operate your game properly. So right now our detection radius is about 10,000 feet, centimeters, whatever the units they use in here. It's 10,000 of those. And the deactivation radius is just set to, just 11,000. I've also made sure that the deactivation radius cannot be under the activation radius. Otherwise, you're going to get some weird programming logic. So anytime you set it under by accident, it's going to automatically just take the min number and just add 1,000 to it. And we also can control the wander radius. Let me change all of these to, that is way too large, too many zeros. Change that to 5,000 for all of them. I'm gonna let the wander radius, I'll let them wander at least 8,000, so they're not all clumped up on each other. That is 80,000. All right. So now if I come in here and test this, I start getting my NPC showing up. You see them load in the background. So I get closer around this corner, you can see them drop in. For some reason my debug sphere is not showing, even though it is active. but it's just a visual representation to to show you when you're not loading the actual NPC information. I'll see if I can get that working before the release in case you need it. The object works as is, but that's just for helpful debugging on my end, just to make sure that the spears are actually operating the way they should be. So you have the NPCs load in. I have not properly set up this environment for the NPCs to actually walk, mainly because they need a volume, because all of the NPCs and even the monsters, they generate their own navmesh dynamically, of which you have to do two things to make sure this is set up correctly. You have to, one, make sure that inside of, I think it's projects, yep, under the navigation system, we have the gather data on. Generate navmesh only around invokers. That's set to 1. That should be that good enough for that. We want to change this default, bring it up a little bit higher so it's a little bit cheaper to create the actual navmesh for the UV tiles. I want to say there was one other option to set to make sure everything is efficient. Oh, you have to make sure this is changed to dynamic. I think that was the last thing. That was it. So now if I go in here and I get a volume, navmesh volume, I'm going to stretch this out to be as big as the city is, town, whatever. That is probably way too huge. Well, that covers most of the map, so that should be good for even when we place down monsters. So now if I go in here and enable navmesh, if I drop out an NPC, I should see it generate navmesh around it. If I don't, then something else is set up incorrectly. I'm thinking I'm running out of time for this video, so after I get this working, then I'll be right back as soon as I can figure out where my proper folders are. There we go, actors. So now we see the navmesh generating. It's pretty huge. You may not need anything that large, but I just left all the default range for the actual navmesh generation to what they normally are, just to see if I have too many NPCs, if it causes a calculation or loss of frame per second. But everything operated correctly for me, so I'm gonna stop right now and continue in the next video.